Welcome, Climate Viewers. This is Jim Lee from ClimateViewer News at ClimateViewer.com, ClimateViewer.org, and WeatherModificationHistory.com. Today we're going to talk about 5 types of real chemtrails. This ain't your mama's chemtrail video. Yes, only 5. Nancy, thank you to those in chat. We're going to try to break it down to 5 main categories, and that way we can kind of keep it simple. Although this is far from simple. As any of you know, yes, I have my grill is in place. This is going to be a crazy video. There's going to be a lot of details. Links are already in the details, so please follow along at home as we progress our way through this. Everything you're about to see is free of charge, open source, and you're able to remix this on your own websites. Sharing is caring, of course. And I greatly appreciate everybody who's supported me on patreon.com/climateviewer, or you can give a one-time donation on PayPal or GoFundMe. It's greatly appreciated. Also, please remember to subscribe to my 2 YouTube channels. User ClimateViewer is my new channel. I'm going to be using it soon. And User Resonated at the bottom there is the one you're on right now. So, guys, let's jump right into it. The 5 types of chemtrails. Artificial clouds, sounding rockets, biological warfare, human testing, and weather warfare. Now, a lot of people talk about this stuff. Very few people are going to give you the facts to back it up. So here we go. Here are the actual facts to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that all 5 of these are in fact chemtrails or chemical trails, aerosols dumped in the sky for specific purposes. And we're going to get into those purposes as well. So if you come over to the starting page, my frequently asked question page, it is available by going to, if you just click on geoengineering right here on ClimateViewer News, you can scroll down and right past the video of David Keith talking about how geoengineering is going to kill people, and the FAQ, which has frequently asked questions like who's controlling your weather and all of that stuff. You'll see 2 subsections, one on HAARP and one on chemtrails. This is where I am. And the page is called Cirrus Clouds Matter, because the majority of this page focuses on what the majority of people are talking about, the chemtrail phenomena or artificial clouds in the sky. So a lot of people have a lot of opinions about what these clouds are, and I'm pretty firm in my belief after 10 years of research. What we're seeing here is a result of jet fuel. But that's only one type of chemtrail. So we're going to get into all of these chemical trails or criminal trails, as just said in chat. I like that. But Edgar Allan Poe said it best, believe nothing you hear and only one half that you see, or believe none of what you hear and half what you see. Especially when it comes to YouTube, because there's a lot of people making a whole lot of money off of scaring the hell out of people. So I break down a couple of these right here. And I think the first one we're going to go ahead and do is obviously the most prevalent, the artificial clouds created by aircraft. And then we're going to jump into sounding rockets. And as the director of HAARP, Chris Fallon, put it, trimethyl aluminum trails from sounding rockets launched at Poker Flat Research Range. In other words, legitimate chemtrail science. We'll also get into biological warfare, human testing, and weather warfare. All of these are covered in my article, 10 Technologies to Own the Weather Today. I have a great video on this. This is a very lengthy article. I'm not going to go through it, but I have an infographic right here, which you can see, that pretty much breaks down all of the technologies in use today to modify the weather. And, they're listed out here. Here's the sounding rockets. Contrail-induced cirrus clouds. That's the artificial clouds. Ship tracks. Geoengineering. Lasers. Satellites. Cloud seeding. Oh my. So there's a lot to get into in that article. And you can go through it yourself. Let's see. You can scroll through it and you can see that I have several quotes here, and then a whole bunch of references. But John F. Kennedy said, "We shall propose further cooperative efforts between all nations in weather prediction and eventually weather control," in 1961. And President Lyndon Johnson said, "From space, the masters of infinity would have the power to control the Earth's weather, to cause drought and floods, to change tides and raise the levels of the sea, to divert the Gulf Stream and change temperate climates to frigid." That's a hell of a statement from 1962. And, very shortly after, Lyndon Johnson did weather warfare over Vietnam. So this is not a laughing matter by any stretch of the imagination. I talk about all of the different stuff in here, and you can see the sounding rocket stuff, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. So first up, let's focus on just the aircraft contrail cirrus. I really want to hammer this point home. The reason why the chemtrail community gets nowhere is because they see clouds over their head and they go, it's global depopulation, it's spraying vaccines, it's orbs, it's geoengineering. It actually is geoengineering, but we'll get into that a little bit. But the problem with all of these above is that they focus on the word chemtrail and contrail, both of which are high-level descriptors, meaning they have different meanings to different people. They're highly argumentative. And if you talk to a scientist and you say the word chemtrail, they're going to laugh at you and ignore everything you have to say. If you talk to somebody on the internet and you say the word contrail, they're going to call you a debunker and they're going to ignore everything you got to say. The problem with this is that when those chemtrails or contrails fan out and they cover the sky and block out the sun, they are no longer either chemtrails nor contrails. They are cirrus clouds. Write it down, underline it. They are now cirrus clouds. CIRRUS. So if you don't understand that, you're never going to get anywhere. And if you really want to do something about it, it's as simple as calling the FAA, your congressman or whoever, that you failed miserably to convince multiple times in the past. And then instead of sounding like a wackadoodle loony, you say, "I am tired of planes making cirrus clouds and blocking out the sun." Keep the language as simple as possible. That's how you actually do something about this. I'm tired of planes polluting the sky with metals that make clouds, that hurt the environment, that are worse for climate change than all the greenhouse gases combined. That's what you should focus on. So back to this article. Aluminum, barium, and chemtrails explain just the facts. So let's get into what those facts are. Aircraft, there's barium and aluminum in jet exhaust. If you go to the IPCC's report, there's a section called 3.2.3.2, metal particles. And in it, they admit that particles comprising elements such as aluminum, titanium, chromium, iron, nickel, and barium are estimated to be present in the parts per billion by volume level at nozzle exit planes. And this is from an estimate from 1975 from the CIAP and these two dudes, 1975. Now, first off, I'd like to point out, come on, IPCC, that's the best you can do is two estimates from 1975. Although metals have been found in the residuals, where were we? in cirrus and contrail ice particles, their number and associated mass are considered too small to affect the formation of properties of more abundant, volatile, and soot plume aerosol particles. So here's the funny thing about that statement. Soot is the predominant cloud seed coming out of planes. And the problem with it is the soot is loaded with metals. So you can't have one without the other. In a recent study done by Ulrich Lohmann, you can see right here, the detected metallic particle compounds were internally mixed with soot. Okay? The most abundant metals in the exhaust of jet aircraft coming from jet fuel, not pipes, not pumps, from jet fuel in jet engines, burning that stuff, was chromium, iron, molybdenum, sodium, calcium, and aluminum. Also detected vanadium, barium, cobalt, copper, nickel, lead, magnesium, manganese, silicon, titanium, and zirconium. Dude, that's a lot of different metals coming out of the back. Considering that some fraction of soot can effectively act as an ice nucleating particle, and that a dominant fraction of ice residuals in cirrus clouds contain metal compounds, the presented findings support the assumption that aircraft engine emissions can act as ice nucleating particles. And then they get into the climate effects of all that, and I'm not going to bore you with all the sciencey words, but that is it in a nutshell. IPCC says it's not really metal, it's soot. Recent studies, there's a whole lot of metals coming out of the planes. And oh, by the way, if you go back to my my frequently asked questions page, and you scroll down here to what makes a cirrus cloud, or there's metals in cirrus clouds filled with metals, click on that. You'll see the same information I just read you and this table. Oh wait, that's Jet A, JP5, and JP8. JP8 is the military jet fuel in JP5. Jet A is what's been burned in all of the commercial flights. And of course they say not detected on aluminum. This is from a lab sample done by a military institute, and there is aluminum in Jet A, regardless of what they say. You can't have 2,100 parts per billion of aluminum in JP5, which is gasoline. They switched to JP8, which is kerosene, and you suddenly have, or diesel fuel, suddenly have 9,360 parts per billion. So there's a lot of aluminum coming out. Also during that switch, they went from 5,000 parts per billion of calcium to 31,000 parts per billion of calcium. That's a huge increase, and the increases are all down the board. Here's your strontium, 12 in Jet A, 70 in JP5, 351 in JP8. JP8, some dirty jet fuel. Titanium went from 35 to 1,056 parts per billion. So all of the metals, and this is from a military paper, you can see right here, dtic.mil, trace element and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon analysis of jet engine fuels, Jet A, JP5, and JP8. Straight from the military, also from Ulrich Lohmann, also from the IPCC. Yes, jet fuel is loaded with all of these metals, and those metals are inside soot particles, and those soot particles and metals make cirrus clouds. That is artificial clouds in a nutshell. So where were we? Let's go back to our picture. Artificial clouds, that's what I call them. Me and my daughter, we call them plane farts instead of calling them chemtrails. But, pick your poison, call them chemtrails, contrails, artificial clouds, preferably, or cirrus clouds, because that's what they are. They're made from soot and metals, and that comes from jet fuel. Period, point blank. And all these, there is no such thing as jet fuel hoaxers. can suck my left testicle. I'm so sick of the fakers on the internet, constantly trying to make a buck to, really, just straight up bullshit people. And this is the no bullshit zone. So we're on our next one, sounding rockets. So let's go back to the old archive of ClimateViewer.com. Oh, before we do that, I did give a speech at the EPA in 2015. I went to Washington, D.C., and I said exactly what I'm saying here. And you can actually watch the video of that here. This actually happened.
Hi, my name is James Lee. I'm from Sumter, South Carolina. I'm a citizen. Why is the EPA claiming that 6 greenhouse gases emitted from jet planes are a threat to human health under the Clean Air Act while doing nothing to address ongoing lawsuits over leaded aviation gasoline or the real health concerns of stakeholders worldwide? Cancer-causing heavy metals in fuels and their additives and aviation-induced cloudiness. You, the EPA, claim the authority to regulate aviation emissions under the Clean Air Act, a law that should protect us from the aforementioned poisonous pollution. However, the definition of pollution is being perverted to mean climate change gases in what can only be called a violation of the spirit of the law. Air pollution which may reasonably be anticipated to endanger public health or welfare. That's the quote. As you can see by the wording in the Clean Air Act, lead, barium, aluminum, and trade secret toxic chemicals clearly present a greater danger to public health than greenhouse gases, no matter how much climate science you accumulate. Furthermore, material safety data sheets of aviation fuel and their additives almost always contain the same warning: do not dump in water. Yet, raw fuel dumping or burning these dangerous chemicals and then dumping them in water is somehow safe. Finally, despite great efforts to find bioaccumulation or biomagnification studies on precipitated aviation pollutants, none seem to exist. The EPA and Obama administration are ignoring the global outrage over the most visible climate change concern from airplanes: cloud creation. Do a search for the word chemtrails on the internet, and you will see millions of concerned citizens who look up and wonder, what in the world are they spraying? Despite what you may think of the myriad of maladies attributed to these clouds, the global outrage is nonetheless clear. They are right to be worried, and we should all be concerned. The EPA's claim that CO2 is a greater threat to human health than contrails and aviation-induced cloudiness is based on incomplete IPCC data that downplays the effects of contrails on our climate. The IPCC's fourth assessment of contrail radiative forcing only accounted for linear contrails, meaning any contrail that spreads out and turns into cirrus clouds was not accounted for. How significant is this heat-trapping contrail conundrum? Quote, contrails formed by aircraft can evolve into cirrus clouds indistinguishable from those formed naturally. These spreading contrails may be causing more climate warming today than all the carbon dioxide emitted by aircraft since the start of aviation. Another researcher stated a single aircraft operating in conditions favorable for persistent contrail formation appears to exert a contrail-induced radiative forcing some 5,000 times greater than the estimates of the average persistent contrail radiative forcing from the entire civil aviation fleet. Why did I lose my place? Although this research has now been incorporated into the IPCC computer models and revised down, in my opinion, these claims highlight gaping holes in climate science. As of 2013, quote, aerosol cloud interactions are one of the main uncertainties in climate research. Scientific understanding of how contrails transition into cirrus clouds is severely lacking but rapidly evolving, with the latest research showing that cirrus clouds are filled with metal aerosols from human sources. Quote, the big one we found is lead, coming from things like tetraethyl lead in fuels, still used today in light aviation. So that's probably the biggest metal that we find, or the most frequent metal that we find, but we find a whole host of different metals actually. Apparently, small amounts of metal particulates have major effects on cirrus clouds. Quote, it would seem that you would have to change all of the aerosol in the atmosphere very radically to get a big effect on the clouds, but because mineral dust and metallic particles are such a small amount of the particulate matter, just 1% or 2%, it means that you only have to change about 1% or 2% of the particles to get a big effect on these clouds. The latest research casts doubts on the IPCC's contrail assumptions and requires serious consideration when addressing the real climate change impact of aviation. High-altitude metals and cirrus cloud condensation nuclei are likely coming from leaded avgas and jet exhaust. Contrails are making cirrus clouds, and small changes in atmospheric metal have large impacts on cirrus cloud creation. Cirrus clouds trap heat and are likely to have a greater climate change impact than CO2. Finally, aviation-induced cloudiness endangers future growth in solar energy, affects tourism and spending, and is projected to make terrestrial astronomy impossible by 2050. Geoengineering scientists, NASA, NOAA, FAA, USDA, DOE, and international corporate partners are discussing the use of biofuels and sulfur-doped jet fuels for contrail control. This cirrus cloud seeding with bismuth triiodide to melt these clouds away. The EPA should be directly involved in these discussions. As a result of these recent findings, I strongly encourage the EPA to consider expanding the scope of this endangerment to include metal particulates and cloud formation from jet exhaust. If the EPA complies with the spirit of the Clean Air Act, they will protect us from metal aerosols attributed to Alzheimer's, autism, cancer, and a plethora of other debilitating illnesses. If the EPA is truly concerned about aviation-induced climate change, they will regulate the production of contrails and cirrus clouds, which change our climate to a much greater extent than the sum of the 6 greenhouse gases named in this proposal. Regulating heavy metals and aviation-induced cloudiness will be meaningless without proper verification. Even though ICAO members sign a binding agreement to only use certain chemicals in their gas tanks, we all know agreements and regulations are useless without proper verification. Therefore, I request mandatory, random testing of jet exhaust be immediately implemented. This is the most important step the EPA can take to do its due diligence to protect us from harmful pollution and get real-world data to improve future regulations. Most of the data behind this endangerment finding comes from research in highly controlled environments where most variables are known. We need verification of non-ideal situations where fuel fouling, fame contamination, or improper maintenance end in vastly different exhaust particulates than seen in lab settings. To achieve verification, I propose that the EPA randomly attach a trailing probe to both foreign and domestic flights, then collect and analyze the results to determine real-world exhaust constituents. Alternatively, ground-based LiDAR observations may be possible over fixed high-traffic areas and prevent possible terrorist attacks using aerosols. Either way you choose, we need verification and protection. In conclusion, the EPA should expand this endangerment to include metal aerosols and cloud creation, create a verification system that includes all aircraft, protects us from aviation pollution, holds violators accountable, and commits to better scientific accuracy for future determinations. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of so many who could not be here. And thank you for listening to a layperson's views on this subject. While I appreciate the efforts of the Center for Biological Diversity, the Sierra Group, and the Friends of the Earth to get the EPA to hold the aviation industry accountable, the poor people like myself have to live near these airports, under these fuel dumps, and under these clouded skies. I hope that some faith can be restored in our EPA by your action here and now. Tell the ICAO that they will meet your demands and our demands, not the other way around. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Thank you for all of your comments. Second panel. Next one.
Yes, thank you. My name is Michael Saraceno. I'm a
And I go on, and just so you guys know, I actually brought 4 of my friends with me. Michael Saraceno at MikeSarah444. You can find him on Twitter. He went on to talk about the links between autism and breathing these chemicals. You can see him here. And,
the vast majority, and I talked to Harvard Science.
He's a very smart guy. He really killed it. Followed up by everybody's favorite, Madison Star Moon. She talked about how she had contacted numerous government organizations and was always stonewalled. I also invited Patrick Roddy. He obviously talked about spraying programs from Stop Spraying Us, San Francisco. And finally, my dog.
Persistent contrails. All but the willfully ignorant know our skies have changed dramatically over the last few decades.
Watching the sky.
Max Bliss. And Max Bliss killed it and dropped the #1 line, which I absolutely love.
Looking for success or to get rich, or more darkly, hoping to implement a one-world government system. Climate has always had natural variability and weather extremes. However, these days, some weather extremes can be stimulated with technology. Is it appropriate to reassess the anthropogenic global warming theory and replace it with climate change is man-made by using covert weather and climate modification technology known as geoengineering for geopolitical ends? We do not need to be scientists to observe the sky and see the obvious negative effects aviation is having and research the spiraling health impacts. Just start looking up and wake up. We do not consent to the use of weather and climate modification or the despotic New World Order.
Or the despotic New World Order drop mic. What? So yeah, this was pretty epic. All of the, my speeches right here. You can read all the way through it, and down at the bottom are all the scientific references. And there are 22 of them, and you can see all of that here. So, yeah, I made that EPA hearing happen. I was the only person to sign up to do it. Once they had to, by law, have a hearing, I invited 4 other people similar to myself, so that it wasn't just me there versus the Pilots Association, the International Civil Aviation Organization, the Sierra Club, Friends of the Earth, and all of these people. So we had 5 different versions of the same story. And, of course, mine, I stuck to all the scientific facts, and I really dropped all the bombs I needed to. Chemtrails Google search, 5.5 million results, July 25th, 2015. So, all right, so we've covered that in detail. That's artificial clouds. I really got off on a tangent on just showing you guys the whole hearing, because most people still to this day do not know that this happened. But yes, I made an EPA hearing happen back in 2015. I bought 4 of my friends, and we went up there and killed it. Slayed it. All right, so that's the artificial clouds. Let's go up here to the top of this one. So on to the next one. What's up next? We've got sounding rockets. Now, I already showed you the quote by Chris Fallon about sounding rockets. If you've not heard about sounding rockets, these play hand in hand with HAARP and the ionospheric heaters and other radars like SuperDARN or the Super Dual World Radar Network. So what we'll do real quick, I'm going to do a real quick jump over to ClimateViewer Maps because I didn't even have it up, and why would I not show you the maps? So we're over here at ClimateViewer Maps. If you go to ClimateViewer 3D right here at the top, and you click on this, you can come down here to pollution and privacy, atmospheric sensors and EMF sites, and you can see all of the ionospheric heaters of the world. HAARP is right here. Let me get my mug out of the way so you can actually see that, and I'll even blow it up for you so you can read it at home. Clicks. That's the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. And then here's a real detailed map of HAARP. Missile defense radars worldwide, but the other one that you want to know about is down here, the digisigns, the lasers, and the VLF is kind of in the same ballpark, but we don't want that one right now. We want the SuperDARN, and they will be down here past all these NEXRADs and radio telescopes, and here we go, Super Dual Auroral Radar Network. So we scroll back out a little bit, scroll to the top. These are all the maps I've loaded. All right, let's close that. Let's close that. And let's turn on the satellite view. And bam, this is what we're left with. So this, let me reset mode, zoom. These are all of the facilities worldwide that are studying the ionosphere. And in order to study the ionosphere and or modify it, you're going to have to use chemicals. And these are chemtrails in space. And as you know, the director of HAARP said, Chris Fallon, legitimate chemtrail science. Some of you have probably seen the NASA video where the guy from Wallops said, yes, we were dumping lithium in space. But you know, it's completely safe and all of that. That's what they're talking about there. So I've done a couple articles on this topic. Artificial gravity waves, barium clouds, and chemtrails from space. You could even go back to the article we were on earlier, aluminum, barium, and chemtrails explained. And if you go past the aircraft section, the very next section, which you can see, I'll scroll down. There's my EPA hearing. There's the metals in the thing. And then we are to other sources of barium. Obviously, it's all in that. Chris Fallon's tweet. And here. Rockets have a barium release system to create ion clouds in the upper atmosphere. NASA admits lithium release. This is the video that everybody's talking about. NASA tracers, clouds, and trails. This is the actual NASA page where you can see them talking about sounding rockets. Now that's a Black Brant rocket, and this rocket releases different types of chemicals. And I also have this on my 10 technologies, which you can see right here. You have right here, this is a trimethyl aluminum trail. This is a lithium trail. Lithium is the only chemical trail that is visible during the day. And this is a strontium, barium, strontium, and trimethyl aluminum all in one launch. Just recently, I did an article on Project Azure sounding rockets chemtrails from space. And you can see that they have something called the Grand Challenge going on right now with these sounding rockets. And the whole idea is that you shoot the rockets into space, you dump your chemicals, and then you use different radars on the ground to measure the ionospheric winds, upper atmospheric winds, the Van Allen belts. All of these things, wind, Van Allen belts, ionosphere, they are invisible. You cannot see them. So you have to dump a tracer or a chemtrail into them in order to make them visible. So you can see all of my articles on sounding rockets by clicking on tags, or the timeline entries on sounding rockets on weather modification history, for chemtrails from space. And you can see things like the charged aerosol release experiment, owning the weather in 2025, triggering the high frequency breakdown of atmosphere by barium release, combined release and radiation affects satellite CRES and the Arecibo ionospheric heater. Oh, if you don't know what the Arecibo ionospheric heater is, why don't we show you that? I'm going to scroll down here real quick and make it 3D because it looks so much cooler in 3D. And the Arecibo heater is right here. And there it is. And that's the one from James Bond, the big bowl that has the catwalk over top of it. Back in the 80s and 70s, they were using this ionospheric heater in conjunction with a satellite that sprayed chemicals in space. And as you can see in my Ting Technologies, up here at the very top, number 3, top center of the screen, that's a satellite chemtrail. So number 2 is a sounding rocket. These two are chemtrails from space, and they dump things like lithium, barium, trimethyl aluminum, cesium. Yes, radioactive cesium. All kinds of different heavy metals because they can be picked up by radars. And that allows them to see invisible structures in the ionosphere. Chemtrails from space, real as rain, can make this up. So on the Project Azure thing, we actually had a video, and this is pretty freaking rare. Behold. We'll do the 5 times speed playback. So at the top we have the barium release, and then you see them falling, and then another barium and strontium release, followed by the trimethyl aluminum pouring out here at the bottom. And then it's going to happen again. These are 4 simultaneous ones. Barium strontium mixture, barium strontium mixture, 4 they drop signed, another puff, and then they're going to keep dropping, and then at the bottom the aluminum comes out, and that's the gray you see there. And then they will observe that over time so that they can see where the winds are blowing and all that sort of stuff. You can't make this stuff up. This is what it looked like a little while later. I'm not even showing the damn video. My apologies. Let's do that one more time. I hadn't changed the screen. Here we go. So, explosion at the top, 4 parts coming down, puff, puff, pass, and then at the bottom, the aluminum coming out. That's the gray trails. So barium at the top on that one, barium puffs in between, aluminum, barium and strontium in the second release there, barium and strontium, boom, come down another little puff, and then finally it's going to release aluminum. These are what sounding rockets do. And those are chemtrails from space. And like I said, here's a video of it, an image taken from a webcam of what it looks like a little while later. And as you can see in that picture, the aluminum spreads out over time. The upper atmospheric winds will blow it in different directions. And that's how they do chemtrails from space. Sounding rockets and satellites. So I think we thoroughly have covered that. I could do that all day long, but let's not do that. So let's move along. Biological warfare, and this is one very, very few people know about. Indigo Skyfall is a made-up thing by the HARP report. It is not a thing. Just take that and put that in a box and throw it in the ocean. Indigo Skyfall my balls. All right, so back to the story. All right. So next up we have, and I have an extensive presentation on ionospheric heaters, space weather control, and geophysical warfare. You can see that on ClimateViewer.com, links in the details, and you can actually see the presentation right here. It's pretty lengthy, and I go through all of the the history of space weather modification facilities. This is not an ionospheric heater. If one more person tells me that I did not include this in my ionospheric heater map, I'm going to lose my mind. This is a VLF transmitter at Exmouth, Australia, the Harold E. Holt Naval Station, not an ionospheric heater. On the other side, right side, this is HARP, is an ionospheric heater. Just put that in there, and this is my ionospheric heater map. Major ionospheric heaters around the world, and you can see all of that combined. Why they heat the ionosphere, space weather control, what the guy said about space weather control, blowing up nuking the ionosphere, all that stuff, Western needles, sounding rockets, plasma seeding with sounding rockets and satellites, chemical release. This is the CRES satellite. Barium, strontium, lithium, calcium, and sulfur hexafluoride was dumped from the CRES satellite. And, it goes on through all of the history of space weather control and how possibly it was used as a weather weapon. Is ELF able to manipulate the weather? Has a technique devised by Tesla permitted the Soviets to alter the world's weather? All thanks to some chemtrails and how it's related to the Chernobyl meltdown, which was only 5.9 miles away. So check that presentation out. I'm not going to show you the whole thing. You have to do a little research yourself. But we're now going to talk about biological weapons. Biological weapons, calmatives, and terrorism. Now, this is where the rubber meets the road. This is what a lot of people attribute to Delta Airlines and things like that. But this is real chemtrails. That's the title of the video. 5 types of real chemtrails, chemical trails that are dumped in the sky, and what their purposes are. So here we have a Russian Hind. Anybody watch Rambo? Anybody that old as me? Anyway, that's a Hind helicopter with a spraying apparatus and tanks. Now we're talking about spraying tanks and pipes and pumps. Not with Delta Airlines. Now we're talking military, okay? So what are we going to talk about in this little jewel? Well, we're going to skip past all this stuff. Chemical weapon trails and calmatives and exotic chemical weapons. Harassing agents like tear agents, vomiting agents, malodorants, incapacitating agents like psychological agents or other incapacitating agents, lethal agents, blister agents, blood agents, choking agents, nerve agents, chemical weapons. The United States is still involved in chemical weapons production. This is what's called narco airways. From the Joint Non-Lethal Weapons Directorate. Also covered in my Directed Energy Weapons 101. We have a couple people who know who Rambo is. Thank God. I'm not that old. Whew. All right. Placement of an incapacitant aerosol generator on board, as well as injectable pharmaceuticals unit outside the cockpit door of planes. And you can see that right here, non-lethal technologies for aircraft. This is right after 9/11, and the Joint Non-Lethal Warfare Directorate talked about putting a chemtrail sprayer inside the plane to spray calmatives or other nerve agents to knock everybody out on board. Pretty crazy stuff. Can't make it up. How about the gay bomb? No, I am not making this up. There is actually a freaking Wikipedia page for the gay bomb with a whole lot of references. It got the IG Nobel Prize, which is hilarious. But basically, Air Force, Wright-Patterson, Wright Laboratory, Dayton, Ohio, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, for instigating research and development on a chemical weapon, the so-called gay bomb that will make enemy soldiers become sexually irresistible to each other, harassing, annoying, and bad guy identifying chemicals. Wright Laboratory, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, June 1994. This is from a FOIA at thesunshineproject.org. You can't make this stuff up. And their website was, of course, deleted, so I had to pull this up from archive.org. But yes, the gay bomb, very real. Oh my God. So these are real chemtrails, biological weapons. Chemical warfare. A peek inside the Joint Non-Lethal Weapon Directorate's Chemical Weapons Program. You can see all of the different facilities, Armatech Defense Products, U.S. Department of Energy, Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, Tennessee. All of these, very real. Thank you, Sunshine Project. Even though you guys have deleted your website, I will keep your work alive. And then right here, protection or proliferation, high contaminant labs and other facilities in the U.S. Biodefense Program. And these are biosafety level 4, 3, bioweapons agents production facilities. There's a map. I'd like to find the actual places, but they'd probably come and throw me in a CIA cell pretty quickly for making that map. But we have the Sunshine Project's map right there to prove that. Agent Green. This is a biological weapon that was used to destroy cocaine plants in South America. You cannot make this up. Everybody's heard of Agent Orange in Vietnam. It's a herbicide, kills trees, plants, everything, and obviously affected our troops severely. I have met many people who have been affected by Agent Orange. Well, Agent Green was in use as early as 1990 something, and probably is still in use today. So biological weapons are being developed to kill illicit crops of coca, opium, poppy, and cannabis in forced crop eradication programs. The pathogenic fungi were developed principally by the U.S. for use in narcotics-producing areas globally, but especially Asia and South America. The agents threaten to legitimize agricultural biowarfare, are environmentally unsafe, and threaten wild plants and agriculture in fragile and biodiverse ecosystems. They also endanger human health, most importantly, the global ban on biological weapons. Quote, Sunshine Project. So biological weapons to destroy cocaine, opium, and weed in Asia and South America. Meet Agent Green. Well, that'd be fine if it just stayed there, but it, of course, made its way back home. Agent Green, some nasty stuff being sprayed worldwide, showed up in America. In Martin Gelsma's Chronology of Mycoherbicide Development Against Drug Plants, with special reference to the genus Fusarium and Pleospora, we see a detailed history of this fungus, its controversial past, and you will realize that the chemtrail problem is a real one. 1980 through 1990, tests find fuminosin concentrations in corn-based horse feed as high as 126 parts per million. 1990, Texas. Rates of neural tube birth defects begin to rise, primarily driven by an increase in anencephaly, which halts brain development. This increase is not noted until a year later. Now it is blamed on the effects of Fusarium epidemic in corn. 2000, U.S. FDA issues draft guidelines for maximum levels of fumigation allowed in food. In a letter to federal officials, the Texas Department of Health worries that the levels may be too high for people to consume corn as a dietary staple, especially the Hispanic populations. 2002, December 12th. Representative John Mica brings up his desire to restart the Fusarium mycoherbicide program in a U.S. House hearing titled America's Heroin Crisis, Colombian Heroin and How We Can Improve Plan Colombia. This is 2002, where they were talking about starting up Plan Colombia again using Agent Green. So if you don't think that these types of biological weapons and chemtrails are in use today, you are out of your freaking gourd. This is what it actually looks like. I actually have some photos. F-oxysporum infected cotton, F-oxysporum infected watermelon, asters, and bean fields. So this stuff is bad. It gets worse. We'll get to that in just a moment. So where are we at next? Next we are at human testing. This is the fourth type of real chemtrail. Real as rain. Now, this one kind of is upsetting. And, you know, kids should know this, so don't take your kids away. But everybody should know this, so let's dig into it. This is what got me started. You're going to notice that the date on this article is 2013. So I posted this a very long time ago. Feels like ages ago. It was a conspiracy, military experiments on unsuspecting public. And this is the United States Army Chemical Corps behavior of aerosol clouds within cities. And the idea was to spray radioactive zinc cadmium sulfide all over America to see what would happen if we had nuclear warfare and how would the nuclear particles behave in our concrete jungles. Yeah, Bamboo, I saw you said concrete jungle. I love me some Bob Marley. I had to use that. And what's scary about this is this quote. Through this case study, the author explores how large number of participants inside an organization will willingly participate in organizational acts that are harmful to others, and how large numbers of outsiders who may or may not be victims of organizational activities are unable to determine illegal or harmful activity by an organization. This is the definition of chemtrails. It's, activity by secret groups to hurt people. Of course, they believe what they're doing is good, but they are hurting people. They did hurt people. You cannot make this up. So let's scroll on down. Weather warfare and defoliation, Operation Popeye. If you want to know about Operation Popeye, come over here to the Weather Warfare Archive on, I'll drop this in chat for everybody. Got a great timeline on weather modification history. And you can scroll through all of this stuff, and it only gets worse. But this is the first page, a whole bunch of FOIAs and stuff like that. And right about here, CIA. And here we go, Operation Popeye. So this is Operation Popeye, Motor Pool Intermediary Compatriot Weather Warfare over Vietnam, March 20th, 1967 to July 5th, 1972. Goals were softening roads, causing landslide along roadways, washing out river crossings, and maintain saturated soil conditions beyond the normal time span. And we got a lot of references for this. So this is what it actually looked like. The silver iodide flares, it's called a JTOW rack. It was mounted on the side of a C-130. There are actually only 3 planes involved in all of the weather warfare in Vietnam. So if you don't believe they can do this sort of thing with just a couple of planes, you're crazy. These are the weather modification bombs made from China Lake Naval Warfare Center in China Lake, California. These are the weapons that were used for the weather warfare in Vietnam. This is Jack Anderson, Jack the Man Anderson, who was the reporter that saw the note on Lyndon Johnson's desk that brought about public awareness of the weather warfare activity in Vietnam. And this is Senator Claiborne Pell, who said, "Oh, really?" and had 3 hearings in Congress, which led to the creation of a worldwide weather warfare ban. And all of the newspaper articles to prove it. 1972, U.S. turns rain into war weapon. If you have not been to weathermodificationhistory.com yet, I don't know what the hell is wrong with you. Oh, wait, that's right. We're shadow banned, censored, and it's very hard to get the truth out there. But trust me, everybody, truth is scarier than fiction. So you can dig into that. Oh, the CIA had something to do with that. More on that in just a moment. So, weather warfare over Vietnam, and there were 3 WC-130s and 2 RF-4C, so that's 5 planes total, and they did weather warfare over Vietnam. And of course, the Secretary of Defense claimed that during the hearings that he didn't even know it was happening. Okay? Originally top secret, now available on my script. So you can actually read those transcripts of the hearings right here. Ouch. What a fail. Gotta be here. Right here. It's on weathermodificationhistory.com, of course. Top secret hearings before Subcommittee on Oceans and International Environment, January 25th through March 20th, 1974. 2 of the 3 hearings are public. The 3rd is still classified to this day. Thank you, Bamboo. And you can see it right here. This is about the briefing on the Department of Defense weather modification activities. And it goes into great detail with maps and all of that stuff. It's very lengthy. There's 126 pages here. If you really want to know the history, you got to go to weathermodificationhistory.com. All right. So let's go back to the chemical idea of Agent Orange, Operation Ranch Hand, or Operation Trail Dust. That's where they were actually doing the spraying to, get rid of all the trees and the plants and everything, defoliate the ground. The herbicides were sprayed in the U.S. Air Force flying C-123s using the call sign Hades. Oh, gosh. Anybody know who Hades is? They really love to pick their names. The planes were fitted with specially developed spray tanks with the capacity of 1,000 U.S. gallons of herbicides. A plane sprayed a swath of land about 80 meters wide and 16 kilometers, 10 miles long, in about 4.5 minutes at a rate of about 3 U.S. gallons per acre. Sorties usually consisted of 3 to 5 airplanes flying side by side. 95% of the herbicides and defoliants used in the war were sprayed by the U.S. Air Force as a part of Operation Ranch Hand. The remaining 5% were sprayed by, guess who, the U.S. Army Chemical Corps. Other military branches and the Republic of Vietnam using hand sprayers, spray trucks, helicopters, and boats primarily around U.S. military installations. That way the Viet Cong couldn't sneak up on them. Yes, Hades as in hell. God of the underworld. Between 1961 and 1971, 19 million gallons of herbicides were used in Vietnam, which amounts to 5,193 gallons daily. During the same time, the U.S. sprayed enough herbicides to cover 30,305 square miles, or 23.8% of the total area of Vietnam, with one spraying. So that's a lot of freaking Roundup. Oh, wait, what does Agent Orange and Roundup have in common? Monsanto made both of them. All right, so let's move along. There actually were several. They were known as the Rainbow Agent. So it wasn't just Agent Orange. I mentioned Agent Green earlier. There was an Agent Blue and a Red and a whole bunch of others. Look it up. Bug warfare. Dropping fleas and mosquitoes from bombs. Cannot make this stuff up. Operation Big Itch. September 1954, Dugway Proving Ground determined the coverage patterns and survivabilities of tropical rat fleas for use in biological warfare as a disease vector. Haters, suck it. Remove. I'm bleeding the trolls because they can troll all they damn well want. Every single thing I'm saying is a fact, is backed up by government documents, backed up by Freedom of Information Act requests. This is real as it gets. So you can hate all you want. Troller's going to troll, but you ain't affecting me, and the truth don't care about your feelings. Write it down. Take a picture. It'll last longer. Oh, wait, I wrote it down for you. So, Operation Big Buzz, 1955, U.S. state of Georgia. 330,000 uninfected mosquitoes were dropped from aircraft using E-14 bombs and dispersed from the ground. Operation Mayday, 1956, Savannah, Georgia, designed to reveal the information about the dispersal of yellow fever mosquitoes in an urban area. The mosquitoes were released from ground level. Operation Dropkick, Savannah, Georgia. Damn, they hate Savannah, Georgia. Where uninfected mosquitoes were released in a residential neighborhood. And another in 1956 test in Avon Park bombing range, Florida, where 600,000 mosquitoes were released by plane. If you want more information on this, see Unethical Human Experimentation in the United States, U.S. Biological Warfare, and the deleted OperationSunshine.org page on biological warfare. And you can see the original FOIA information on each of those right here. Straight from the military. Operation Dropkick was deleted. But anyway. So, let's kill the sound just for a second, because I don't want to get a copyright strizite, but here we go.
Giving them a voice. In the early days of the Cold War, the Army arrived in St. Louis and began spraying zinc cadmium sulfide on children and families who lived in and around the Pruitt-Igoe housing projects.
They said we were living in the project, but we were the project.
No one questioned why the Army placed chemical sprayers on the backs of cars and the tops of buildings. Many thought they were killing mosquitoes.
Why would you do that when you know you was not spraying for bugs? You was spraying for people.
These are some of the grown children exposed to zinc cadmium sulfide, now in their 60s.
I remember the soldiers coming and taking chains and chaining the box, the black box, to the light post.
Dorothy Johnson and her doctors never knew what caused blisters to boil up and cover her body when she was just 18. The lifelong emotional scars never healed, and she wonders if there is a connection to the secret testing.
They isolated me, and I stayed there about a month to recuperate. I lost my fingernails, toenails, the lesions on my body. Eventually, they fed me intravenously. I couldn't see well. They had to keep me in the dark.
It doesn't sound possible.
We were playing, and we ran in the house because we saw these guys in the alley in spacesuits. And that's what we called them. Now I know they were hazard suits.
These women who never met share similar stories. and illnesses.
I remember the trucks coming by. I remember the men on the roof.
In the 90s, the Army admitted to Cold War spraying and even confessed to planting a cover-up that they were testing a smokescreen to protect cities in case of an aerial attack from the Soviet Union. The Army insisted the spray was harmless.
This was linked to the development and testing of weaponized radiation.
Sociologist Lisa Martino-Taylor has spent years researching the St. Louis testing and has gathered thousands of now declassified documents. She says cadmium would have been toxic enough, but government documents show a link between the St. Louis testing and military-funded human radiation experiments. The military now admits to some horrific Cold War human experiments around the country. A handful of hospital patients were secretly injected with plutonium. Babies and pregnant women unknowingly received radioactive iodine. And from 1946 to 1953, 73 mentally disabled children in Massachusetts were fed oatmeal containing radioactive calcium. Yet much of what happened in St. Louis remains shrouded in secrecy.
Not only was data missing, data had been deleted.
In 1972, the government destroyed Pruitt-Igoe.
What is it that made this study so classified that they're still not talking today about it?
Decades later, questions haunt these survivors. Could the chemical spray have caused their degenerative bone disease or the cancer that plagues them and their families?
That one of the types of cancer I had was papillary carcinoma, which the surgeon said to me when at first I was diagnosed, he said, "Did you have any radiation exposure?" And I said, "Not that I know of."
These women haven't forgotten, and they vow to keep talking about what happened now that someone's listening. Do you trust the government?
It's betrayal. I feel absolutely betrayed.
I know this has gone on in other countries, but I thought that our country was a little bit better than that.
Whether radioactive material was used remains an open question. What is not in dispute is the Army selected the poor and the powerless and exposed them to potentially harmful chemicals without their knowledge or consent. After our initial report aired last month, Missouri's U.S. Senators Claire McCaskill and Roy Blunt wrote to the Secretary of the Army demanding more information. The Army has yet to respond. An Army official told me they'd first respond to the senators before making any statement to the media.
So, Lisa, do we know how much zinc cadmium sulfide was sprayed in the St. Louis area?
Well, a lot of data is missing, but according to the National Research Council, between 1963 and 1965, more than a ton of this chemical was sprayed here. And the truly horrific part of these programs is that people had no idea that they were being used like human lab animals.
So what happens next?
Well, we wait to hear if there's going to be public hearings from the U.S. government, and we wait to hear from the Army.
I'm sure there'll be more reporting. Lisa, thank you very much.
So I wanted you guys to hear that before I got to that. So zinc cadmium sulfide is radioactive despite what people are saying in chat. The cadmium is bad for you, and those are first-hand accounts from the people from the map that I showed you at the very beginning of this article, and this is all too real. Some of the operations associated with this were Operation LAC, or Large Area Coverage, 1957 and 1958. The U.S. Army Chemical Corps operated which dispersed microscopic zinc cadmium sulfide particles over much of the United States from a C-119 flying boxcar. The purpose was to determine the dispersion and geographic range of biological or chemical agents. Link, reference, all that. Operation Do 1 and 2, and then the St. Louis one, which was known as the Manhattan-Rochester Coalition. Research on health effects of radioactive materials and tests on vulnerable populations without consent in St. Louis, 1945 to 1970, written by Lisa Martino-Taylor, the lady that you saw interviewed in that piece. And that's where I got the quote at the beginning. The piece analyzes a covert Manhattan Project spin-off organization referred to here as the Manhattan-Rochester Coalition and an obscure aerosol study in St. Louis, Missouri conducted under the contract by the U.S. military from 1953 to 1954 and 1963 through 1965. The military-sponsored study targeted a segregated, high-density urban area where low-income persons of color predominantly resided. So yeah, they sprayed the hell out of a bunch of black people in St. Louis. Later on, the people who had died, they went and ground up their thyroids to find out what their dosage rates were and all of that sort of stuff. Then I found this jewel, which puts it all together. This was the military's final report on the whole thing. Toxicological assessment of the U.S. Army's zinc cadmium sulfide dispersion tests, which shows all of them. And here you go, St. Louis, 1963 through 1965. Number of releases, 42. Total quantity in kilograms, 984. Approximate square miles, 7,400. Yes, this all happened. Camp Cook, California, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Texas, Washington, Nevada, Chippewa National Forest, Minnesota, San Francisco, Indiana, California, Washington, Maryland, Biltmore Beach, Operation Whitehorse. They have the names of them here. How much chemicals they dropped? 150,000 square miles on that one. St. Louis in 1953, just like she mentioned in the video. All of this very much real. And then the bottom ones here are the dug away proving grounds. This is a military installation where they tested it there as well. And this was by the Subcommittee on Zinc Cadmium Sulfide Commission on Life Sciences, Division of Earth and Life Studies, National Research Council. Of course, these jerk-offs went and said, there really wasn't any health effects to all of this. It was minuscule, if at best. But you saw that interview from the local St. Louis news from people who were affected by it. And I'll take their word over some government report any day, especially when it was the government that effing did it to begin with. So that's real chemtrails human testing. Which leaves us with our last, but very not least, weather warfare. This is the chemtrail, most interesting to me personally. The one I've done the most research on, and we've already touched on it a little bit. So we're going to go straight to this jewel right here. The CIA, Weather Warfare and Climate Terrorism, February 22nd, 2015, written by yours truly. And what you find out here is that a geoengineer named Alan Robach got a call from the CIA. Alan Robach said, I got a phone call from two men who said they work as consultants for the CIA, and we'd like to know if some other country was controlling our climate, would we know about it? Quote, Alan Robach, I told them after thinking about it a little bit that we probably would, because if you put enough material in the atmosphere to reflect sunlight, we would probably be able to detect it and see the equipment that was putting it up there. At the same time, I thought they were probably also interested in if we could control somebody else's climate, could they detect it? Harrowing stuff, to say the least. And this is from an article titled Chill Factor at the CIA Weather Query, and it was published in 2015. So CIA calls up geoengineer, asks if, would we know? I mean, if somebody, climate wars, using weather as a weapon will have a global effect. That's RT right there. But anyway, dear CIA, we cannot detect what's called rogue geoengineering with today's best atmospheric sensors. Proof, 20th Conference on Planned and Inadvertent Weather Modification Association, American Meteorological Society and Weather Modification Association meeting. Title of the meeting, this was January 2015. Oh wait, that's right before that article got published. Albedo variability limits potential detection of engineered increases in reflected sunlight. And they say a bunch of very sciencey words here. It's going to be kind of tough for some people, but a fundamental scientific question is whether an engineered increase in reflectivity, albedo, either from short duration field experiments or from prolonged implementation of a solar radiation management SRM scheme, would be detectable with the current global climate observing system. The answer is no. In summary, although very large albedo increases are potentially detectable, meaning maybe, possibly, interannual albedo variability overwhelms the maximum conceivable increases associated with the leading proposed solar radiation management schemes. In other words, from year to year, the variability nature dictates that we would not be able to tell the difference between an engineered increase in sunlight blocking, from man-made sources, weather warfare, rogue geoengineering. We cannot tell the difference. And there is the actual video. You can watch it. It's on my YouTube. I published it as soon as it was available. And it was by Diane Seidel, NOAA Air Resources Lab. And you can see that this is...
My name is Diane Seidel. I'm with the NOAA Air Resources Laboratory in College Park. And the title of my talk, which is slightly misspelled here, is actually the conclusions of my talk. Basically, it is that the albedo variability limits the potential for detection of engineered, not engineering, increases in reflected sunlight.
And you gotta hate that when you misspell the title of your presentation. But regardless, no, you cannot actually detect rogue geoengineering. That's a big problem. So you go down here, you can go through this extremely lengthy article I did about how the CIA opened Center on Climate Change and National Security in 2009, and then by 2012 the CIA closes its climate change office. This is priceless. The CIA for several years has studied the national security implications of climate change. Mr. Evitz said in an email stated, as part of a broader realignment of analytical resources, this work continues to be performed by a dedicated team in a new office. So the CIA are still very much involved in climate change, geoengineering, and all of that. Many of you probably saw the video of CIA Director Brennan speaking at the Council on Foreign Relations about geoengineering. I'm not going to bore you with that. Henry Kissinger, the CIA, and weather warfare. So these are facts. These are all facts. The weather warfare over Vietnam was done by the CIA, led by Henry Kissinger. CIA tampered with Cuba's weather as well. Cannot make this stuff up. Where are we at? I'll go back a page, and it's right here at the bottom. CIA Project Nile Blue rain embargo on Cuban sugar crops. Now, a lot of people know about the CIA's involvement in weather warfare over Vietnam. The CIA, Henry Kissinger, the U.S. Air Force, and the U.S. Navy did weather warfare over Vietnam without even telling the Secretary of Defense. It was a secret program. Another secret program they did was try to destroy the sugar crops in Cuba, to basically break Castro. Quote, but the seeding near Cuba was to cause less rain, not more. It was supposed to squeeze rain out of the clouds before they reached the island. You might say we tried to embargo rain clouds. This is a fact. Pont adds that Nile Blue was really aimed at destabilizing weather in the Soviet Union, China, and Cuban to ruin harvests and create political unrest. Weather warfare, crop warfare by the CIA. It is unlikely, however, that the program was quite so benign. In 1962, years before the Nile Blue program was initiated, ARPA had contracted a classified research project with the title Some Upper Atmosphere Aspects of Chemical Geophysical Warfare. I wish this weren't true, but it is. Here are the references: state.gov, CIA.gov reading room. Get your VPNs on if you want to go read it. They will know you're reading it. And the list goes on. And, thank you to Dominic Marama for finding these articles. Did the CIA order weather modification to ruin cumin sugar crop in 1969 and 1970, or didn't it? And these are all very much real. Another CIA plot, Cuba crops. And that's where the quote comes from. It's right here. June 27, 1976, the year I was born. But the seeding near Cuba was to cause less rain, not more. So, cloud seeding as weather warfare can be used to shut off rain as well as flood out the Ho Chi Minh Trail like they did in Vietnam. Interesting, funny note. A Canadian guy literally sued the military over using his patent for weather modification techniques. A federal judge must decide whether the CIA and the Pentagon infringed on a Canadian meteorologist's rainmaking process during the Vietnam War. Just hilarious. Gotta love patents, right? So the CIA actually used his patent. It ended up in court. You can't make this stuff up. Just a funny little side note. But the CIA seriously tampered with Cuba's weather. And that's where you see that in the background there. And Henry Kissinger, everybody loves to hate him. He was behind a lot of that, if not all of that. This is a very lengthy article as well. Goes into all of the different weather modification reporting acts, laws, and all of that sort of stuff. And of course, my solution to it. So watch this video if you want a much more detailed information on this Henry Kissinger and the CIA. But if you're looking for somebody to be behind a secret government program designed to manipulate the weather or do geoengineering, spraying from unmarked planes, look at the CIA, because guess what? They have their own airline. And if you've never heard of Janet Airline, just another non-existent terminal. The CIA does the flights to and from Area 51, things like that. So they have their own airline. They have the history of weather warfare over Vietnam, over Cuba, and they're interested in geoengineering. Today, they called a geoengineer and asked him, if somebody was screwing with the weather over our country, will we know about it? So that was just recently in 2015. So take it for what it's worth. The CIA is involved in weather warfare. Has been since 1960 something to the present. And that is just conspiracy fact. Alright, so I think we're almost done here. Alright, so what do we got left up here on the screen? I had a couple of things. What is this? Oh. So I gave a presentation on this at G. Edward Griffin flew me out to Arizona to Global Warming, an Inconvenient Lie. Everybody on the stage had a PhD except for me. And I gave a presentation on all of this sort of thing. And you can see it right here.
Jim Lee from Sumter, South Carolina. I'm a diligent researcher, and I publish all of my research on
yelling at me in the background.
And I create apps for activists on ClimateViewer.org. I want to thank Mr. Griffin for allowing me this opportunity to speak. Thank you, sir. For giving me this opportunity to speak, and thank my wife for all the support over the last 5 years. It would not be possible without that. Okay, so geoengineering, weather modification, and weaponizing nature. Now, this is a topic that is very personal to me. We would not know about any of this if it weren't for real journalists and people who actually care. Hero Jack Anderson over there saw a secret memo sitting on Lyndon Johnson's desk. The military is pretty freaky. Put the website back up. They're pushing for another experiment. Hopefully they'll forget about it and not come this time. The Asilomar conference, this is a 2010 meeting where they had all of the geoengineering science.
Now, when I gave this presentation, this screen disappeared. The words were missing from it. I went back and edited the video so you could actually see the actual quote. But no joke, I reviewed my presentation the night before, and when I gave the presentation, this screen was missing. Listen to this.
Scientists get together and they said, quote, as for the U.S. Department of Defense, forget about it. To this group, the involvement of the military is pretty freaky. The other quote they said that's missing from there, and I'll just do it from memory, if the globe starts to see this as a quote, an idea cooked up by rich Anglo-Saxons to dominate the climate, then we will all be tarred and feathered. I debated Ken Calder and David Keith for 3 years in his forum that's online, and I finally had enough of him talking about reframing questions to get the answers that he liked that I told him, Ken, I'm going to be there with the tar and feathers. He banned me from his forum the day after, and Andrew Lockey had a little cry fest with him. But the problem with this is geoengineering SRM will kill people. And this is why it has not been legalized up to this point. Whether it's going on or not is a topic for later discussion we're going to get to. But this is the real problem, is that they know it will change rainfall patterns worldwide. And they've got all the charts to prove it, and the natural analog.
And that's my presentation there. You can check that out. Lee James, why no show for months and now a marathon? Well, you know what? I've been de-stressing, brother, man. I finally got my good results of my Graves' disease being clear, and I want to keep it that way. I realized that it had been quite some time since I did a video, and I said, well, what the hell? Let's do a big one. And let's really put a whole lot in it. So that's why. It had been far too long, and I decided that I was going to do a video that actually contained everything. So, and, you know, I was getting my teeth fixed also, so I kind of, you know, had to wait to get this done and then learn to speak again without sounding like a anyway, so that's why I took a long break from making videos, just so you know. But anyway, back to this. I promise I won't go away so long. I will make my next video a little sooner than later. I also did a presentation called The Climate Changers and Water Wars, Technocracy, Geoengineering, and Replacing the Water Cycle. I hope you guys will go through this as well. Got a lot of slides in it. Pretty important one right here near the end. Where is it? Why is it doing that to me? Quit clicking right here. So this is where we're at today. Geoengineering and public acceptance. Currently, skies covered in clouds. They call that accidental geoengineering. Meanwhile, begin geoengineering, climate engineering, or climate intervention using pollution sources that create clouds. Call it an accident. Then you do geoengineering governance while this is going on. Write laws to exempt technocrat scientists from legal liability. Field experiments. Begin testing geoengineering technology. Engage public response. See David Keith's ScopeX or Stratocruiser, the program that he's wanting to do right now. And then finally, legal global deployment of geoengineering is step 4. Gain control of Earth's thermostat and alter rainfall patterns worldwide. Own the water. So I hope you guys will actually go through this presentation as well. It really explains what technocracy is, what it has to do with global warming, and how they're trying to control your life and all the resources on the planet. And water is life, so water being the most important. That's why I proposed a solution to all of this, called the Environmental Modification Accountability Act. a draft legislation to end atmospheric modification without notification and sensors to detect weather warfare. I hope that you guys will support this act. It is an add-on to the Environmental Modification the Environmental Modification Act, ENMOD, or the Convention for the Prohibition of Hostile Uses of Environmental Warfare, right here. The Environmental Modification Convention Weather Warfare Ban of 1977 through 80 was signed in 1978, and you can see that each state and party to this convention undertakes not to engage in military or other hostile use of environmental modification techniques having widespread, long-lasting, and severe effects as a means of destruction, damage, or injury to any other state party. So this is the actual wording of the Weather Warfare Ban of 1978. You can actually see it. I've got several pages on this here where you can see the the actual document. This is what it looks like. Hearing before the Committee on Foreign Relations of the United States. Convention on the Prohibition of Military or any other hostile use of environmental modification techniques. The problem, and it's a big one, is that they never came up with a way to, tell us if somebody was breaking the ENMOD law. So we've got a law in the books that says weather warfare is illegal. The dumping chemicals, environmental modification. So not just weather warfare, it includes things like defoliants, like Agent Orange. We have to come up with a way to catch people in the act. That is the point of all of this. Who are the major players? America, Russia, and China. They are the major players. And I show the technologies. I go through a whole lot of stuff in this. But transparency, to be hostile or not, we need to require people to tell an international registry before they modify the weather, because we're not going to get them to stop modifying the weather, but we need to know why you're doing it, where you're doing it, and all that, in case you end up hurting people. That way you can be sued in a court of law at the very least. Why not ban weather modification altogether? Bans do not work. As you can see, nuclear explosions are banned, but North Korea does it all the time. Best case, build sensors to catch bad actors. In the case of the nuclear ban, they created a comprehensive test ban treaty organization that created an international monitoring system, which has seismographs, infrasound recorders, and all that. And that way they can tell when somebody breaks the law, whenever they break the nuclear ban. The same is true for weather warfare. We need to know when people are doing it. The only way we're going to know is if we catch people in the act. Transparency is a start. Transparency may result in public outrage or acceptance. We need to start with disclosure. Knowing is half the battle. So that's what this is. And then verification, part 2, trust but verify. We need to come up with a, similar to what the CTBTO's International Monitoring System did, a weather warfare monitoring system. Something that can actually detect rogue geoengineering. As Diane Seidel said, we cannot detect weather warfare or rogue geoengineering. The CIA was curious about it because they want to be able to continue doing what they're doing. So this is the idea, using the Internet of Things to create, rain samples, camera samples, aerosol samples, to catch people in the act. To know on a real-time map, similar to ClimateViewer, when people are doing weather warfare. And how it works: require notice up front with the International Registry, catch bad guys with sensors, no fear, that's you. That's the entire Environmental Modification Accountability Act in a nutshell. It's available at climateviewer.com/nmod. After 10 years of researching this topic, that's what I've come up with as my solution. I believe that I am the only person on the internet who's actually put forward a solution to this. I've already got the backing or the agreement of David Keith, Ken Caldera, two most hated geoengineers on the planet. Several other prominent scientists. The world's top historian on weather modification, James Roger Fleming. I interviewed him at the Weather Modification Conference recently. He said that this is a necessary thing. So I hope that we can, make this a reality, because unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. So that's my big presentation on the 5 types of chemtrails, why it matters, and you can see right here, video link to James Roger Fleming.
Experiments we wouldn't know till after the fact.
I think there's a real important role you can play in this. And there was a movement to ban atmospheric nuclear testing after Starfish Prime. Part of it was a run-up to fallout balloons.
The limited test ban treaty.
And that was stimulated very much after 62, I think the ban was 63. And so there was a public outcry, and Astronomer Royal in England got involved, and very prominent people agreed that we were doing things that were beyond our ken. And so I think that there's a role to keep this accountability there. I would argue for a longer warning period.
I agree, and I originally started with 30 days, something like that, but Obama tried to regulate the coal industry, and all of it was thrown out because it was too onerous. And I'm trying to get something that can realistically happen. And it's a 3-step solution. State Department, UN Security Council, it's an addendum to NMOD, it's a law. That's pretty simple. All I want to do here is get people like you and scientists who understand the technology and understand the ramifications and have the weight behind the name to go with.
I don't know about the weight.
They'll listen to you before they'll listen to me, is my point. So, honestly...
I know that certain things happen in history, and I don't have any security clearances to know what's going on now. But I do know that there is a need-to-know kind of hierarchy, and they won't have everybody in the weather service or in the military weather services knowing exactly what's happening.
Compartmentalization is always a problem. And, like what I talked to the Naval Research Lab, we cannot talk about this. That's unacceptable. And the reason they cannot talk about it is because if you can do it for 5 minutes, you can do it all day. Just this 5-minute thing doesn't mean that you're not violating NMOD. And to be very specific, it says military or hostile weather modification. So technically, NMOD bans all military weather modification, not temporary or long-lasting.
There's a conference here. I think you might be part of it. Is the weather modification section of
the 21st conference over. I'm going to that. That's why I'm here.
So there's some big things happening tomorrow.
I want to talk to Alan Robach tomorrow.
You should talk to Bill Cotton too.
William Cotton is going to be here.
I just interviewed him for our project. So you should talk
to hurricane controller himself.
Well, you should talk to Bill.
Yeah,
he was involved in Storm Fury and stuff like that.
I've got his presentation from 2008 on my website. Okay. So he talked about doping jet fuel, something that the chemtrail people online are very fascinated by.
So there you have it, guys. That was me at the 21st conference on planned and inadvertent weather modification, and right there, running on dirty, high sulfur fuel at cruising altitudes, airplanes could add plenty of sulfur dioxide to the stratosphere. Which brings us full circle, and that's why cirrus clouds matter. I hope that you guys have found this an informative video. I know that it's quite lengthy, and most people don't have an attention span past 5 minutes, let alone 20. So this is my way of trying to show you the big picture. Now I can cut this up into chunks. I could probably do 5 videos out of this one, but I'm a very busy person. That's another reason why I make so few videos. I'm not here to make a video every single night. I love you guys a lot. I love what I do. I want to get the truth out there, but at the same time, I got a wife and kids. They're my 2 daughters are young. I'm starting MMA right now. I need to get physically fit. I love to fight, and looking forward to that. Working on my father owns a trailer park with a whole bunch of broken down trailers. I'm working on that. I'm trying to start a business making websites. I just completed 2 websites for a restaurant and for my MMA studio. So I've been real busy at all that. But at the same time, I had to come back and give you guys one for the record. And this is definitely 5 types of real chemtrails with the facts to back it up, and not some somebody pulling poop out their butt and throwing it at the screen to scare you. This is about people knowing the truth, and the truth is scarier than fiction, and I think that most people will agree, especially after all the stuff I just said. So please do your part and share this, because sharing is caring. Everybody I want to thank my Patreon supporters. You guys really keep me going. Anybody who's donated, I really appreciate that. Please hit the subscribe button. It may not work. It probably won't. I am very much censored. My video, 10 Technologies to Own the Weather Today, to this day still only has around 2,000 views, and it's one of the most detailed videos on the topic ever made. But go figure. You know what I mean? It's an uphill battle, and we're going to have to fight it, and we're stronger together, and I get by with a little help from my friends. So please spread the word. You can check that out, the 10 Technologies to Own the Weather Today, and all the references that are already in the a lot tonight. I hope that this will spur, send it to your debunker friend, your personal troll. I know a lot about aerotoxic syndrome. In fact, in both of those videos, when I was interviewing James Roger Fleming and when I was in Arizona doing that presentation on stage, both of those presentations, I was running well over 100-degree temperature because of aerotoxic syndrome, because I flew there. I took a train to Washington, D.C. to the EPA hearing, thank God. But when I flew out to Arizona, I got up to 103-degree temperature. I was throwing up all night the night before. At first I thought it was just nerves, but I came home, I had pneumonia. And then when I flew out to the Weather Modification Conference last year, the exact same thing did. My neck swole up. I got pneumonia. I had a very high temperature. It was bad. So I have officially sworn off flying forever. I do not want to fly. I was just invited to speak on Gaia TV in Boulder, Colorado. And they were like, we'll fly you out. And I was like, no, you won't. So that's going to be a real problem for me to go up there and meet, Chris Fallon at the HARP facility, because that's a hell of a drive. But, if anything else, maybe I can find like a nanoparticle, gas mask, but I don't think I'm going to be able to find a gas mask that's good enough to filter out barium and fuel oil from the fume events that happen with aerotoxic syndrome in the cabin of a plane. But regardless, airline industry, you're #grounded. I'm not flying with you unless I just can't do it any other way. I got sick both times I went and did presentations. Very, 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 very sick. And I smiled my way through it, and nobody knew it. But when you come to do the show, you got to do the show right. So anyway, I was on a mission. I got through my presentations. I interviewed Raytheon, the U.S. Naval Research Lab, Jim Fleming, all those people. I was sweating profusely under my clothes. I was very sick. But anyway, so yes, I know all about aerotoxic syndrome. If you guys don't know about it, go to aerotoxic.org. Learn all about that. I know it was Delta on one, and I don't remember on the other, to be quite honest with you. I think it was Delta on both, but regardless, yeah, airline industry, you're grounded. So guys, I love you, mean it, and this has been an extremely informational video. It's an hour and 45 minutes so far. I hope that you guys will share this with other people, because with information comes power, and with power comes great responsibility. So I hope that you will use this information to reach out to senators, to reach out to your neighbors, to reach out to government officials with facts that you can back up and not sound crazy. And I hope that you will use this information to attack ideas, not people.
Kids are impressionable. That's why here at this station, we watch the programs and commercials your child watches carefully. He may see bad guys, but not in the role of heroes. And he'll learn that crime doesn't pay. Because your child's welfare is our concern, too. That's part of our code.
Better than anything you can get without a prescription. Anything. It's the best.
Better than anyone. Better than anyone.